as I'm listening to our table talk, and I start thinking about the vision, and I realize that the vision that we all have, whether it's at home or at work or at church or wherever, is the sum total of everybody who is touched by that vision. And that humility could be that maybe I'm only a small part of that vision.
And the two key points we came up with was we talked about how difficult it was to get people to change, and so we decided that the important thing is to take the time to develop relationships up front to build that trust, which you can then call upon when you enter difficult times. And the other key point we came up with was, and this is an old one I think everyone knows, basically that people will only change when they can see it's to their advantage to make the change. So we always have to be thinking in terms of how the other person will see the change we're trying to accomplish in order to accomplish the change that we want to make.
And we had some great discussion. I think two of the big points that we came up with was humility really is tested every day in our organizations. It's the little decisions, it's the big decisions. You can't just wait for the big decisions because you won't know how to react. And so really it's every day being tested. And the second part I think we came to the conclusion of is if humility is a part of your ethos, a part of your culture in your organization, you will be able much better to manage through that and manage in that dynamic. We talked about an experience where we had some great clinicians, but the humility wasn't there and really caused some problems within the organization. And once they addressed that issue, the organization thrived and did much better when they addressed the humility issue because they had the technical skills.
We talked about how you don't need to humiliate a person to teach them humility. They also learn much more from seeing a humble leader as far as being able to learn that. We talked about a program at Alverno that Sister Bernadette is heading up, where she's helping students with a financial need with a loan that they pay back by working at the college. And we talked about how they learn humility through that program and how it benefits the college by keeping the student here and then the things that they do to work off their loan. And the last point was that humility takes time to practice.
Hi, my name is Andrew, and I work for the Catholic Churches on the east side of Milwaukee. And our conversation focused on that kind of tension you have to live in, the juxtaposition between wanting to be successful and wanting to be humble and include everyone. That when there's some tough decisions or tough projects to move forward, you want them to be successful and you want to look good and you want your team to look good, but you have to make sure that everyone's involved and everyone's connected to it, and sometimes that might be to the detriment of your own personal success, and it might be challenging to your success, but it's going to be better overall to get everyone involved. And one thought that came out was you have to care less for yourself than for the ultimate goal. You could have a team project and you can see it's going to fail, but if your piece looks really good, you can go to your boss and say, well, hey, look what I did though. I did a great job. But rather than trying to at least save yourself out of this, you can spend your time working with someone else who's not maybe pulling their weight, not succeeding, and work with that person and try to support them and make the team better, and you're going to have greater success ultimately.
My name is Barb Groshek. I'm from the Alverno Early Learning Center, and we talked about a couple of things. First of all, dealing with your own children, and if you tell your child that they can't do something, and then they come back to you and they say, well, you're just mean all the time, you won't let me do it, what step do you take? And we said, going back and listening to their conversation and not making assumptions of what we think they're going to say, but really listening to them. And then maybe you did make a mistake. Maybe you can go back and say to them, after thinking about this, maybe I was wrong, and you could go in a different direction, and not to make yourself as the all-knowing parent, but to actually listen to what your child says.
And I guess two things. One, initially we had difficulty coming up with a person, and the reason for that is when you work in a culture of humility, it's more of what we see and what we do, and less of an individual person and sort of what that means in terms of drawing people and why people stay where they are. And the other thing we talked about was learning about humility through difficult circumstances. And so whether it's in a corporate environment or whether it's in a school setting, when something difficult is happening and you're the one that's kind of frontline and engaging with that, you may not always know what to say. The power, I think, is in really listening and taking from that person what you can learn so that you can replicate that as you move forward. And we talked about the learnings can happen from adults that we work with, and then I shared stories of how much I've learned from children that I work with in schools and how they've taught me humility.
How many people talked about children at their table? Yeah. We talked also about how it's not all that different in managers. We talked about some of the most humble moments come just after we realized we stepped in it and really messed up, and that the power of apology is profound on your group, or pressing the reset button, so to speak. I mean, it really speaks to the group in a way that, it shows that you care in a way that's really hard to duplicate. And we kind of moved into a section about, dealing with weak performers causing pain points in your company, and just, how do we manage that? What do we do? And the conclusion was, we have to strike that balance between leading as a servant leader and also never accepting mediocrity, but doing that always considering the fact that everybody in your organization or group is fighting a battle about what you know nothing about. So always be kind in the process, because you may discover there's a barrier there that you can help them through.
We discussed just trying to put yourself in other people's shoes, keep an open mind, and realize that there's always different points of view that you have to kind of put yourself in their position to understand where they're coming from. And we talked about working for organizations, not my current organization, just like to clarify that, where leaders often aren't humble and try to read my own handwriting. Where they aren't open and humble, and how employees can have defensive anxiety because of it. So, yeah.
And we actually started talking more about some social science and then humility. But what I love about our program is that it's about helping people up. And it's not just handouts to people. We had a lot of talk about how you develop that culture that continues to foster these young women to break that cycle of poverty. Thank you for your hard work. And that led us into some discussions about some people and how they approach situations. And as leaders, we have to be very cognizant of the context in which we see things and hear things, similar to what Greg was just saying. Seeking to understand, because we may see things that may not look right to us, but once we get the opportunity to understand the context and the purpose behind the behavior that we saw, then we can either work to change behavior, or we can work to make sure it's understood or how others perceive it. The other thing that we talked about was many times we're tested by humility, and sometimes we are in a situation where a conversation may come up and it's not the right place and not the right time. And so as leaders and as peers, we may have some awkward silence. It may be time to stop and reflect. It will be uncomfortable, but then seek the right time and the right place for those discussions to take place.
One thing that we talked about was, as a leader, being okay saying, I don't know, not knowing the answer, but then actually doing the work to follow up. So finding out the answer, and that can kind of build trust and show that you are a reliable leader who hears what someone is wanting to know, and you're actually finding out that information for them. Another thing we talked about was needing to be agile and moving quickly. while also coming to consensus. And we don't have a solution for that, how to do it, but it's kind of an area that we're continuing to think about and reflecting on, and kind of living with that unknown. Like, how can you move quickly, but also, make everyone happy and feel that, everyone wants to have input, and you really want their input, but how can you do both of those things at once?
One of the things that kind of came out as a consistent theme is that you have to constantly be aware of the person in front of you. So no matter how impassioned your opinion is and how eloquently you think you're stating it, it's not as important as the person. No matter how tight the deadlines are and you're convinced that you're not going to hit the deadline, it's not as important as the person you're talking to. The rules that you have for your organization, whether it's dress code or any other rule that you have within the organization, to address those issues, the most important thing is the person that you're addressing, not the rule itself. And even the goals of the organization. There are times when goals we can't meet them, they won't be met, causes all sorts of tension and pressure. We had a great story of someone that, as a leader, said, let's talk about you. How are you doing? And separated that from a discussion about the goals. And it was a really powerful example of leadership and humble leadership that really helped the organization move forward.
I've been at the table here with two executive directors of organizations. So some of the things we talk about is, you're the new person coming in, and you're replacing someone that's been very successful already at all the characteristics that we've talked about. How do you operate in that situation? And that can be really test your humility there. And also moving into a position of leadership where before you might have had to just worry about yourself or your own performance, but now you have to worry about an organization. And that can also test your humility. So what we talked about was really, once you do it, or you've seen someone else that has done it, and you've seen the success, it does become a little bit easier. And if you do it once, you can do it again. And the other thing we talked about was really, going back to the kids situation, having your kids give you feedback. I had the pleasure of doing that a couple of weeks ago. Having my 18-year-old son give me feedback on my parenting skills. So what you do is you find out really who you are. And we think a lot of, who you are at home is really who you are at work also. You might be able to mask it a little bit better at work, but who you are at home really is who you are, and so that's where the change needs to start.
A number of us are from Mount Vernon, so we may be hearing some of the same things, and our colleagues over here said almost exactly what we had talked about, but I'll try to just therefore sum up. First of all, we don't all know each other, so we spent a fair amount of time trying to understand each other's worlds and what's going on. But we thought that really one of the most powerful phrases that any leader can say is, I don't know. And I reflected back that one of my very first bosses used to say to me, Mary, I don't know is a great thing to say, and in your case, it's usually true. So I've tried to carry that with me. Wherever I go, I know everyone knows something I don't know, and I think being part of a learning community is a very special gift because we learn from all those around us every day.
Kind of piggybacking off of a lot of what the other tables have said is kind of the conversation we had. We started with Ed, who had to go to work. He works for the Boy Scouts organization, and he started out talking about how they need to close camps for Boy Scouts, and personally for him, putting that pride aside and seeing the big picture. And that kind of led into a discussion about how we need to listen, and listen at all times. Will create a humble leader, recognizing that you may not have all the right answers and you might not have gotten it right the first time, but you're going to explore different options later on. Somebody had said that too with the power of apology. And then our last thing was leadership formula cannot be taught. You can't sit in a classroom and give it to you. It's what's actually physically inside you. And when you start with you, it becomes more authentic.
And our table started with talking about actually sickness and about how sickness can really humble a person. You end up having to ask for help and, not in the most easiest of times for those individuals. We also talked about how cancer research centers are now trying to heal the whole person. It's not just the cancer, but it's also their spirit and their well-being that they're trying to work on as well. And that went into talking about business, the same type of a thing. It's not just the numbers, just as it's not just the cancer. We're people, and we all need to be focused on attitude and goals and common goals and mission that will help our culture and really help the individuals, whether it's at home or again in the business setting. Then we bounced over to a humble teacher. There was someone in our group that choir ended up being a very, very popular activity in that school, and normally choir is not, and it was because of this teacher that was very supportive and helped the children grow in that setting. So you can kind of see how when you're focusing on the people, that draws other people to them. And then lastly, we kind of ended up joking about Undercover Boss, the show Undercover Boss, how apparently those people must have a very high level of humility and confidence to be able to jump into a setting like that. So kind of a little joke at the end of it. So